Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Christopher Budd. Most recently, he was the director over at Sophos X-Ops. Welcome, Christopher.
Hey, thanks for having me. How are you today?
Doing well. Well, could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career?
Sure. I have been in technology and security for, I'll put it this way, more years than I am told is wise to put on my resume. I was most notably at the Microsoft Security Response Center for 10 years, starting back in 2001 up through 2010. We'll use that to help kind of bracket. Average lifespan in the MSRC was about 2 years, and I did 10 years. So I was one of the survivors. I've been at security companies ever since, Trend Micro, Palo Alto Networks, Avast, and like you said, most recently, I built and led the X-Ops communications analysis and research team over at Sophos. So I've been around a while.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so obviously we talk about the talent gap a lot on the show. Do you think it's a real thing, the talent gap in security? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
I would say it's real. I would say that it doesn't look like what I think most people think it looks like. I think it is this very strange mismatch of too many people looking for too many jobs in one place and not enough people with the right skills in the other place. And unfortunately, and you and I have talked about this, unfortunately, there is kind of an industry built up around convincing people that certain training and certain certification programs are the easy way to do it. And I think that's helping to create this imbalance that we see. I'm going to be controversial and say that the best people that I have worked with in this field, in terms of researchers, communications, everything, they all tend to not have a classic computer science, cybersecurity, higher education background. Some of the best people I've worked with have completely different backgrounds and have gotten into this because they had a native interest and they started pursuing on their own, and that organically evolved kind of their career.
Interesting. Are there certain traits that people with different backgrounds you think bring with them that people that come from the traditional computer science or, IT degree route maybe don't have?
I'm not going to talk about what people that follow that traditional route don't have, because I don't want to seem overly negative. But what I will say is what I've seen in people that gets them far in my world is a natural curiosity, an ability to learn, a high degree of independence and initiative. I always say when I'm interviewing for people, and I've said this for decades, literally, I don't really care what you know today, because in this industry, what you know today is going to be out of date next year, and it's going to be completely obsolete in 5 years. I'm more interested in how you think, how you approach things, what your motivation is, and how quickly you can learn something. Because again, the way innovation and development works in this space, what you know today won't work in 5 years. And so someone who is an expert, someone who is an expert COBOL programmer, that's great. And they had a great bump back in 2000. I remember that. But that doesn't help us with generative AI coming down the pike.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you, I guess when you're interviewing somebody, how do you identify some of these traits that will make somebody successful in security long term? Like, are there certain revelatory questions that you can ask somebody to really kind of crack open their mind?
Well, it's a combination of looking at their background and frankly having as human a conversation with them as possible. I will focus on, tell me examples of problems that you solved, how you solved them, things like that. But I have a humanities background, so that may be a bit of my bias showing there, but I find just talking with people is a big help. Now, one thing that I will mention, because I've been in incident response crisis management. That was the bread and butter of what I did at Microsoft for 10 years. When I am hiring people in that space, I actually very specifically look for two traits. One is the degree to which someone coming into this space has a natural call and drive for this space. And the other is how easily can I scare them away? because one thing that I found in incident response in particular, it's like with first responders, having the wrong person in the role is actually worse than no person, because the wrong person becomes someone that you have to carry. Whereas if there's no person, you don't have to carry them. And so when I'm interviewing in that space, I'm appropriately trying to scare them off to get them to understand just how hard this is. And I'm also, like I said, trying to find out, why do they want to do this? Why do you want to do something that is hard? Why do you want to do something that is thankless sometimes? Why do you want to do something that has a high degree of burnout? Because what I have found is, if someone does not have something in here that drives them to do that, then they are going to burn out because they're going to run out of fuel. Because in that space, the praise and support is few and far between from outside. You have to have a tank in here that's going to get you through it during those hard times.
Yeah, so you have to have a strong enough orienting principle or motivator to keep you going through the tough times and the emotional roller coaster of it. It's so funny. It's so similar in recruiting too. We could have a really, really good day, and then all of a sudden we could lose out on a $50,000 fee the next day. It's just constant peaks and valleys, and stress, So obviously incident response being one of those fields that stress management becomes extremely important. So beyond, I guess, having that strong orienting motivator, can you, I guess, screen somebody for like stress tolerance or ability to operate under pressure, do you think?
To a degree. I mean, part of that is where their background shows. One thing that I found is, in incident response in particular, the people that are drawn to it and do well I'm an exception, but they tend to have a public service or military or intelligence background. And so you can see that sense of calling manifest in their personal and work history there already. Part of it also is just having conversations and explaining to people what it's like. Explaining to them, look, there are days where you're going to get up, you are going to get the tar kicked out of you by the bad people. You're going to feel like crap. And then when you come back home, to what you think is the home team, the people that you're fighting for, they're going to kick the tar out of you too. Are you ready for that? Because that, for me, that was the biggest stark realization when I got into the space for the first time. I always said I was ready for the bad people to be lobbing rocks at us all the time.
That you expect, yeah.
Right. What I wasn't expecting was to be standing there fighting the bad people, and all of a sudden I'm getting hit in the back of my head with rocks from the people that I think I'm protecting. So going back to your point, there's a degree to which you can assess for it in conversations to a degree. But I realize this is kind of an unpopular thing to say right now, but at least with me, it's also just a feel. You get a feel for the person. When you do this long enough, you get a feel for the work. I've said I have a long and intimate history with burnout. I have burned out basically 3 times over 4 instances. I say that because I have burned out twice. And I've seen people burn out. I sat down in a crisis meeting once years ago. I'm looking across the table at someone that I've been working with for years, and I'm just looking at him and I'm like, yeah, he's not doing good. He's not long for this world. And 6 weeks later, he quit with nowhere else to go. I literally have a colleague that was well respected in the industry who has passed on because of substance abuse. And, so you get a feel for it, and you get a feel when you talk with people. And that's one of the things, coming back to the talent gap. I think one of the things that I'm concerned about with the way recruitment and hiring goes is, I'm all for automation. I'm all for efficiencies, but we need to keep the human element in this all. And, I have yet to see any sort of AI processing that can really capture that kind of spark that I'm talking about, that I look for when I'm hiring people.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a little bit concerned about it too. I mean, I've seen some recruiters on LinkedIn, basically bragging that they use AI to conduct screening calls so they can, screen people more efficiently at scale, and, hundreds of people at a time. And like you said, I'm all for efficiency, but there's certainly something lost, I think, there when you're screening for communication skills. Ideally, that's a big part of security, is being able to communicate with people, especially under pressure. So,
Yes. And there's a phrase that I've used when I've led groups, and that is unit cohesion. And that's another thing that, especially with incident response, that's something that's really important. You need, you were just alluding to this. Yeah, you have basically, a small unit of people that have to work, that have to have each other's backs, and for that to be effective, you have to have trust, and you have to have that sense that everyone is supporting each other. And frankly, short of the people themselves having a say in the recruitment, I don't see how you really get that. When you're a manager and you're recruiting, it's kind of your job to understand what your unit cohesion is and what the group is like, and to be aware and looking for that cultural fit on behalf of your folks. But again, I don't see how you can automate that.
yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, you have to be careful at the front end when you hire somebody of, bringing somebody on that, say they don't get promoted, and their peer gets promoted, they end up building up resentment. And I feel like if there's any resentment or politics or toxicity or anything like that brewing, it's during those stressful times when that type of thing is likely to come out. And in the worst scenario, really, because if everybody's operating in a high level of stress and emotions are running high, that's about the worst time to have some sort of confrontation. So that's one of those intangible things that we talk about in recruiting is culture fit, in your words, team cohesion. How do you, when you're hiring somebody, screen for that or assess that?
I'm pausing to think, because you're essentially asking me to make explicit something that I've been doing intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so how do you do that? I think it's through having conversations. I think it's through knowing, my person Alice is like this. They have this kind of sense of humor. They look, when things get tough, yes, they get snarky, but they get snarky because they care. Bob over here is very easygoing, but they approach things in this way. I think having a map of what your current group is like in your head helps, so that you can kind of, when you're talking with someone, they made a joke. Alice would love them for that. They'll get on in that way. Bob is great at coming up with these unorthodox solutions when his back is to the wall. And this person just gave me a really clever solution that I don't even think Bob would have come up with. I think that would be a good fit. Kind of mapping dots like that as you're talking, I think helps. As we're talking about this, I think one thing that I think is important though is, and I realize this is kind of a word that's on outs right now, but it's important to be aware of how you can introduce diversity into it as well. And by diversity, I mean diversity of people, backgrounds, all perspectives, everything, because there is a risk if you start looking for a Frankenstein of Alice and Bob, then you're not getting, and that's all you're looking for, then you're not getting anything that you don't already have. You're just getting more of it. And so, having that sense of how people can interact, support each other, interface, be compatible, be supportive, and expand and grow together, I think is important. And just going through all of this again, I'm all in favor of efficiency. I don't see how AI can replace all of that. Mind you, AI is still. I just did a lookup of myself on one of the main AI things, and it did a great job. Except it said I work for a company that I never worked for, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, where did that come from?
Yeah, boy, what you're describing there is almost kind of the idea of culture add versus culture fit. That's a distinction that I've heard made before, where so you're looking for folks that both in terms of skill set and in terms of personality and intellectual diversity and stuff like that, that adds to the team. It isn't, like you said, like a carbon copy of the people that are already on the team. I mean, unfortunately, in my experience, most hiring is done in a very kind of narrow-minded way where, we'll only hire somebody who's done this exact same job before at a direct competitor. And, when you hire that way, inevitably, there's going to be a lot of similarities between the people that you're hiring. If you're only hiring from the same type of company and the same type of role in the same industry, so how can we get more hiring managers, hiring teams to see the value in transferable skills and, differences of background versus defaulting to hiring, the exact same person? What's the business case there?
The business case is, the business case I would make is actually, I'm going to go on a limb with this, is what we're talking about is bringing an entrepreneurial spirit into the hiring process. And what I mean by that is bringing some risk and creativity so that you can achieve, so that you can open for possibilities for achievements that you haven't thought of already. I mean, the whole point of the system that we have when it's working well is that it is creative, it is innovative, and it enables people to grow and do things that they hadn't thought of before. It is an open and expanding system as opposed to a closed system. And
yeah, I like that.
When when you fall into the no one got fired for buying IBM mentality, which is basically what you're talking about in that kind of cookie cutter hiring process. When you do that, then you're following the safe path, which means that you are self-limiting your growth and potential. It's funny because one thing that I learned from my instant response years is the importance of planning and the equal or greater importance of getting rid of the plan once you have it and improvising. The act of planning is helpful for helping you understand what you have, where you want to go, kind of structuring your thoughts. But a plan once on paper becomes an inherently limiting thing because what you're saying you are going to do is encompassed on that piece of paper. That limits, anything that's not on that paper is off plan. And so you're not going to do it. So being willing to go off plan and improvise is critical. Now, I learned that in instant response because in incident response, literally every time we could tell something bad would be coming, we would build a plan. So that's the planning. That was good. And as soon as the hurricane hit, the plan would go out the window because there would be some element to the crisis that we weren't able to account for. And so we'd have to make it all up as we went. The benefit of that is that enabled us to have end results that we hadn't thought of in our planning. But bringing this all back to what you're saying, being too conservative is inherently limiting.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of makes me think a lot of the way that hiring is done nowadays is in an effort to minimize risk in a lot of different ways. You want to minimize the risk of a bad hire. So you default to hiring somebody who's done the exact same job before. They're a known quantity. We know that they're going to be able to do the job on day one. We're not going to have any surprises, but like you said, you may also be limiting your potential upside there. It doesn't allow for a lot of creative, flexing or agility as much. So yeah, maybe that's the takeaway then, is just companies should be more open to taking more risks in hiring if they want truly high performing teams.
Absolutely. I mean, and actually you've hit on something that I've been thinking about for a while. When I was at Microsoft in the 2000s, it was not uncommon for someone to start life as a support engineer, then work their way up to become a program manager, and then they might move over to be a product manager. There was a lot of lateral movement in Microsoft in those days, within the company, at least, maybe not for external hires, but within the company, they were willing to look at someone who'd been doing good work in one area, but was interested in shifting to learn something new and say, okay, you know what? Let's have you be the Windows product manager for this. You've got no background. You've got no background in product management, but you've been doing great work here, here, and here. So let's see what you can do. And there was a level of dynamism and creativity in that flexibility that when I left Microsoft in the 2010s, it had become much more ossified. And you couldn't be a product manager if you hadn't been a product manager, which means, the only way to be a product manager is to always be a product manager. And that ossification, we've seen it take over the industry more broadly too. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of creativity that happens when you basically create, almost a stew of capabilities. My background is incredibly diverse. I started life doing Word basic programming. I became a network engineer, got into security. I've done help desk. I've done communications. All of these things, they don't make for a linear story, but they make for a very full and creative package so that when certain things come up, like for instance, we're talking about a developer customer base in, at one of my jobs when we're dealing with a communications issue, and I can chime in and say, oh yes, I know that audience. I used to be part of that audience. Or we have a support issue. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what support's like. I've been on the phone. Again, I think, coming back, is there a talent gap? I think even more than a talent gap, as we're talking, I think there's a creativity gap.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, certainly from a hiring perspective, that registers, I guess, with me, because I'm, kind of on the front lines of that. When I start working with the client, 99% of the time I can guess exactly who they want to hire, and I'll spell it out for them. They're like, yep, that's right. And it's exactly what I described. It's that low risk, exact same person, direct lateral move. They've hired 10 of those people before. It's very predictable. So creativity, I think we need more of.
Yeah. And so going back, how do we convince people? Maybe we convince them, I mean, I'm certainly not suggesting you say this to those people when you're talking to them, but, maybe we convince them by getting them to understand that if all you go for is all you ask for, then all you ever get is all you ask for, which means you're never going to be surprised. You're never going to have anything more than what you've already said that you want.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's funny. I could give you an exact example. So I've traditionally worked with a lot of consulting firms, from audit to DFIR, and security operations, MSSPs. Again, standard way of hiring: hire somebody from a direct competitor. They've done the same job before. And I've always thought, hey, if you're an external audit firm and you want to hire an internal, or you want to hire another external auditor, why not hire somebody from the client side? Because they uniquely understand the challenges of a client and what it's like to work with an external auditor, and they bring that unique perspective with them. But the pushback inevitably is, well, they're not a consultant, they haven't been in an external audit, so they can't handle the pace of consulting. And my thought is, yeah, maybe some people can't because they're not used to it, but surely there's somebody who's been on the client side that's capable of operating in that external capacity as a consultant. You just have to be creative in how you screen for that. And, if you ask somebody about their primary drivers, what gets them out of bed in the morning, if somebody's super passionate and they work fast and they're efficient and they're organized, I don't see any reason why somebody couldn't make that transition. Yet, 99.9% of consulting firms just won't make that risky leap, I guess, to hire somebody like that. So.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really interesting anecdote, because that kind of reinforces a trend that I think we're seeing in technology across the board, which is people that are selling are more and more, almost literally pushing what they want the customers to have, rather than listening and understanding what the customers want and need. And I have a whole thing that I can go down regarding how, like, Microsoft and Google are forcing AI onto people that they don't want, and this this whole, we're just going to push stuff out to you, I hear lurking behind what you're talking about, because getting someone who had been on the customer side. I'm old enough. I hear that. I'm like, well, that's a no-brainer, because that's how you know what the customer wants. That's how that's how you have happy customers, because you have someone that says, no, I know that the customers don't want X, Y, and Z because I've been the customer. And when you all tried to give me X, Y, and Z, it annoyed me and made me start looking at other people. Again, that, and what's the old saw? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. There is a degree of insanity in our industry right now.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, you almost said the exact words, voice of the customer. That's something that I've been interested in lately, trying to figure out how to, market my recruiting firm services. Can you speak in the voice of the customer? Because if you can, the customer understands that you understand their challenges. So no better way to do that than by literally hiring somebody who would be a customer, who can speak in their own voice.
It's funny, when I was at Microsoft, one of the things, to your point, one of the things that I would say is in my years prior to Microsoft, I ran networks. I had literally 30 some technical certifications. I had all of the Microsoft back office certifications. I was a Microsoft customer. If you cut me, I would have bled blue. And when we would be doing things in Microsoft, I would go back to that experience as a customer and say, look, I've been a customer. I've been the person that's going to be dealing with what we are talking about. I can tell you this is going to annoy the hell out of people.
Yeah.
I always view that as a positive thing. Yeah. Mind you, you are talking with the person who also, I will say, a bit of a tangent, but will say, I have advocated for like 20, 30 years that technology executives all of them should spend a week on phone support.
Yeah, I could see that.
Because because I guarantee, after a VP in charge of Windows spends a week on phone support, there will be changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think sometimes once you get to a certain level within an organization, you do kind of sit atop your ivory tower and generally don't get down into the weeds and understand on a ground level, what challenges the customers are facing, what your, more entry level employees are going through. I mean, a lot of times some of the best ideas are, they come from the people that are living this stuff day to day. It's not always, the executives, but I think sometimes there's an ego element to that. How do you parse out like what's a good idea from your staff versus what's not implementable or maybe not an ideal fit for your team?
Uh, you know, First and foremost, I'm pretty pragmatic. So first and foremost, is it a good idea? For me, will come from evaluating it against what is our core business? What are we seeking to accomplish every day? I've seen a lot of really great ideas in theory that are great in theory, but don't meet that pragmatic bottom line requirement. I tend to describe those as science fair projects. So I think keeping grounded in why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? I mean, at the end of the day, this is all business. We are trying to sell things so that we can get paid. And so how does this help that? And it doesn't necessarily have to be we're going to turn around and sell it for $2.99 on the App Store. It can be a longer play in terms of building up reputation or influence, but it does have to have some grounding in reality. Beyond that, as a manager, I tend to take a very, for lack of a better way of putting it, I try to be as egoless and humble about things as possible. I know that the people working with me and for me have expertise in areas. I know where I'm strong. At least I like to think I do. I know where they're strong. And so, how do I recognize a good idea? Beyond that pragmatic evaluation, I'm going to ask people who are smarter than me what they think of it.
Yeah. And always good to have mentors and a network that you can ask about things that you're not directly an expert in. So, we had kind of touched on the certification issue earlier. What do we do with all the folks that are trying to break into the field right now that can't? Because there's a lot of them. There's tens of thousands. It sounds like so.
I'm going to go back to what I was saying at the beginning. So how I got into this is I had a native interest in it. I started exploring and learning. When I've talked with people kind of one-on-one about this, what I've said is learn the basics, find ways to learn the basics, find ways to join the community, and just go with that and let that, go with that and let that take you, which I realize is a very almost, Zen-like, seemingly passive approach, but that is what I have found is most effective. Passion and native interest will carry you far. I think one thing that I see a lot of that I disagree with is people telling others that you can jump into cybersecurity directly. Now, cybersecurity is a discipline that sits on top of other disciplines. If you want to understand cybersecurity, you want to go in that path, then I would recommend people first learn either there are kind of two, in my experience, two main paths. There's the development path and the networking path. And pick one or a hybrid of those. Start learning those. You're not going to understand how attacks work if you don't understand networking. Just flat out. You're not going to understand how malware works if you don't understand how to build things. And so learning those as a first step, and then going into the security aspect of things later, I think is the best way to go. Because one thing that I've said, security in particular, and this is somewhat in contrast to privacy, security is a mindset more than anything. It's everyone that I've worked with in security has a similar mindset. Now part of that mindset is they don't trust anything, and they tend to be kind of contrarian about everything. And that's a whole other thing that we could talk about. But when you're learning, you have to have those basics and fundamentals. And so, learn how to code, learn networking, find communities that you can participate in, and contribute and participate. And frankly, I would do that over any 6-week boot camp.
Yeah. I guess the challenge I see is, so, if we have tens of thousands of people, and I talk about this often at this point because it was so striking to me. There's a boot camp vendor. They advertised on LinkedIn that they have trained at least 30,000 people as entry-level potential SOC analysts. And they have this message board. They have 20,000 people that are job seekers in that message board at any given time for 50 open jobs. So at a 400 to 1 mismatch, that means you have to be in the 0.025% top 0.025% to get a job breaking into security. And you would have to figure there's at least thousands of people that do have that foundational IT background that are essentially prepared for these entry-level security jobs that sits on top of IT. So any thoughts on how we can open up more of those jobs, given that there's on the order of magnitude of dozens, if not maybe hundreds of entry-level security jobs at any given time?
I'm going to be candid and say I don't have an immediate thought on that. I mean, it's there's a part of me that is tempted to go back to some of the people going into these and ask them, do you really want to do security, or are you doing this because you think that's where the market is? Because if you think that's where the market is, with respect, and that's the only reason, then I wouldn't go down this path right now. I think the reality of the jobs market is not lost on any of us, and for good or ill, this is not a time for people to be going down this path if they're only in it for the money. Beyond that, I think that coming back to why do people want to come into this space, and taking that and being creative and looking at other places. I mean, one of the things that I've said is that as technology expands, and this is going to speak as much about privacy as security, as technology expands into everywhere, places that you don't think of as needing security and privacy expertise need it. So I was actually reading, here's a true story. I was reading a story from a restaurant critic in the Washington Post, and someone had written in and they were complaining about a restaurant that was demanding personal information. They wouldn't take a reservation without it. And I'm reading that, and I was saying to my fiance as I'm reading it, this is an example of how privacy expertise is needed in a completely non-technology place, because basically the right answer to this was the people running the restaurant, front of house staff, needed some basic privacy training. And so the discipline behind security and privacy is needed outside of technology more. And if you are truly interested in this as a discipline, then I think creativity, as far as looking for other places to do it and to do good, is out there.
Yeah, so you could almost be, if you're entry level and you have some foundational security knowledge, foundational IT knowledge, foundational privacy knowledge, you could be essentially a security evangelist for local small businesses. And yeah, and who knows what that could lead to. I mean, yeah, I've been telling people get out there and in your community, security community, as you had mentioned, do conferences, go to chapter events and ISACA, ISC squared, ISSA, all those guys, InfraGard, and get out there and meet people. I guess in my mind, there's just too big of a mismatch to where there's no possible way the industry could hire all of these folks. And, being a security evangelist for local small businesses probably doesn't pay a whole lot. And I think a lot of people have been sold a bill of goods and now they have considerable student loan debt, or they maybe got a personal loan to get a big boot camp and now they can't find a job. It's just, it's an unfortunate situation. I think maybe leveraging AI to improve one's skills, maybe see if they could be considered for something more mid-level. That's a discussion I've been having recently is, maybe entry-level security roles are becoming a thing of the past because, there's so many senior people in the market right now willing to accept mid-level roles. And then the mid-level people are now, been on the market for months. They'll accept entry-level roles. Where do the entry-level people go?
Yeah. I mean, I think now the danger with what you're saying is that with that scenario, we are looking at a lack of experienced people 10 to 20 years down the road. One thing that I think is hugely underappreciated in this space is the importance of experience. And experience is important because, when you watch these, like if you watch Dateline, I watch Dateline, the people that do well in solving the cases tend to be the detectives who have 10, 15 years of experience. And experience gives you something that no amount of book training can replicate. And I will argue if you can't replicate something in book training, then for the foreseeable future, AI is not going to be able to replicate it either. And so, I do worry about the expertise and experience pipeline gap that I think we might face because the exactly like you said, everyone's kind of getting pushed out. It's like musical chairs, and so the newest people are the first ones pushed off the chair. Yeah, I do wonder sometimes we as an industry shouldn't be looking at something kind of like a guild model, by which I mean, where there's actual apprenticeships and a process of developing and cultivating expertise over decades. Because, one thing I've seen, the technology changes, but the problems remain fundamentally the same. And again, this is where expertise helps. I can look at AI and say, oh, okay, new thing coming. I know some of the problems we need to be thinking about because I've seen us make those problems in the past. I have a saying from my Microsoft days: any mistake worth making is worth making 3 times.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think the government is doing some of that with apprenticeships. Maybe that's halted now with the new administration. I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't see a lot of that happening in the private sector. I mean, I think of some companies like, Aon, Strauss, Friedberg, Mandiant. They've always traditionally been very good at training people and having them go through rotational programs and stuff like that to figure out if they're a better fit for, say, proactive services or GFIR reactive services. try them out in a few different areas and see where they fit best. I don't know why it doesn't happen more. I think part of it may be just the short-term focus, reactive hiring versus proactive talent pipeline building for the future, thinking, like you said, 5-10 years out. I tend to agree with you that I think starting about 5 years from now, we're not going to have enough good senior security people because nobody's taking up the charge to train them today. So, I mean, that's a big driver of this podcast, is to get more of that to happen.
Yeah. Well, I think not to pontificate, but I think across the board in the past 2.5 years or so, what we've seen is just an emergence of radical short-term cost benefit analysis thinking. And so, why are companies not investing in talent training and things like that? Because with this hyper short-term focus that we're seeing, it's looked at as a cost center. You don't see an immediate benefit from it. So why are we doing it? Cut it. We're in a phase right now where I think, going back to the talent gap and kind of that mismatch I've been talking about, I think for various reasons, we are seeing at the corporate direction level just an immense amount of really harmful short-term thinking that is frankly laying the groundwork for future problems. It's a few years ago, we had trouble hiring people because everything was so aggressively fluid on the candidate side. Now it's so aggressively frozen on the hiring side that I think, basically, this industry is prone to wild swings. And I think we're laying the groundwork for another phase in a few years, exactly like you're saying, where it's hard to find experienced people, and it's going to lead to another crazy time where the candidates are in charge once again. And
Yes.
Speaking as someone who works in the industry, it'd be nice if that comes sooner, because jobs will be easier. I know a lot of people are looking, but that's good. That imbalance is not good for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And there's a lot of companies that or hiring teams that feel that they have the leverage right now and are putting people through extra interview rounds and doing really unprofessional things really far into the interview process. I keep hearing stories every week of some really nightmarish business practices, and it's making a lot of hiring teams look really bad and damaging the employer brands of a lot of different companies. So you have to figure that it's going to be a really interesting candidate-led market here in a few years, given the experiences that everybody's had recently.
Oh yeah. Now to be fair, I don't want to seem like I'm doing the classic both sidesism, but to, I guess, do the both sidesism. I remember in the midst of the hiring frenzy, candidates doing just really bad things as well. It's one of those things where you almost wanted to take both sides and say, folks, everyone take a breath. Let's act like grown-ups. Let's all act professional. We'll all be better off for it, please. Yeah. Candidates, if you accept an offer, stick with the offer. Don't ghost the company on day one. I remember hearing about people doing that. It's just, but again, this all comes back to where we are right now, which I think gives me concern about the future in this space. Good security people, good privacy people, you don't just crank them out. They're not donuts. You don't crank them out overnight. They develop with practice, with experience, with expertise, with mentoring. And if the current market is basically stopping the development pipeline, then we're going to have a gap. And set aside how much of a pain that's going to be in terms of recruitment and costs and all of that. That's bad for everyone's security. It's not good. near as I can tell, let's think of it this way. Near as I can tell, on the adversary side, on the bad guys' side, because we know that they professionalize. We know that they have their own HR departments. We know that they have their own pipelines. They don't have this going on their side. I don't foresee a bad people talent disruption,
Hiring freeze.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, it's kind of fun to think of it that way. It might seem a little silly, but it is actually important to think of it that way, because at the end of the day, security is an adversarial thing. This is, you asked me, how do I kind of screen for people for that thing inside? I think I'm exhibiting one of the things that I sometimes see in people here, which is, I do this because I care about this. I want people to be safe. And it concerns me when the macro trends on the ground are pointing in a direction that indicates that it's not going to be safe. I mean, that's one of my, to editorialize for a second, one of my big beefs about the current state of hiring and everything is not even the team that people are going through for finding work. It's the fact that it's not safe right now. The amount of attacks that we see, the threat environment, it's as bad as it's ever been. And it's like there's a crime wave and we're cutting the police department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you would think that in order to be effective in combating the bad guys, we would have to at least match the efforts of the bad guys in terms of hiring and, talent pipeline development and stuff like that. I mean, do more with less only gets you so far. You can only run so lean for so long before you start to see some negative downstream consequences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I talked about, I have an intimate relationship with burnout. This entire industry is suffering burnout collectively as an industry. I mean, I've never seen it this bad. And that's another thing that concerns me in the 5 to 10 year mark. I mean, I'm seeing some of the best security people I've ever worked with look at this all and say, you know what, I'm done. Throw up their hands. I'm going to go carve wood somewhere. But by the way, it's really interesting the number of security people who, when they tap out of this industry, go and do something very non-technical, very very outdoors. Kind of hands-on, outdoors. I've seen people talking about building car repair, woodworking. We could talk about that alone. It's a very interesting thing. But yeah, when your best are walking away, that's also not a good thing.
Yep. Well, and as we said, everything seems to be cyclical, and the pendulum will inevitably swing back and swing back again. So I always just kind of tell people, hang on and hang in there and do what you can with the resources that you have. So we're coming.
I was just going to say, I used to joke during my crisis response days, people would say, hang in there. And my dark humor response would be, I have no choice. The rope is too strong to break.
There you go. Well, on that positive note, we're coming up on time here, Christopher. So just one last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Boy, I think we've covered most of the major things. I think one other thing coming back to diversity, and that is, and we could talk about this for hours too. It's important to recognize sometimes that the skills that make people good at this can make them not seem to fit well in a corporate environment. And if you want that capability, you have to understand that culture and you have to nurture it. Otherwise, you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you have to get creative in hiring to hire creativity and
exactly
outside the box thinking. That's a great point, Christopher. If people want to reach out to you, how should they do so?
I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for Christopher Budd. I can be reached at christopher@christopherbud.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Christopher, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.